My, my job is to propose a couple of ideas which might be useful in the education of designers. And of course, we're all talking about leadership, but my idea is to implement the topic of leadership into a wider whole, which is governance. Governance is the wider structure, the wider context of leadership, because all kinds of leadership, we've heard a few, Nicola developed some of the models, and Timo Meinhardt did the same in the volume you can read over there. You can see on page 29 what he wrote about the different models. Leadership is embedded into governance. What is governance? Again, there are German descriptions of governance, but there is not a single word for governance in German, which is amazing. I describe what governance means. It's a kind of institutional structure for a body, in economic, political, etc. terms, entrepreneurial, social, health, etc. A body which has a kind of institutional structure and led by a steering body, a controlling body. The whole description means governance. So it's not just one person or a group of persons steering the organization, but it's the whole organization. And governance in terms of leadership already implies a couple of ethical values. There is fairness involved in governance, accountability, responsibility, transparency. All those four values are already implemented into the idea of governance. One of you asked the question, what about universities and other bodies where governance plays a role? I think that is an important question, because governance shows different faces wherever you need steering and controlling bodies. So a university is wholly different from Siemens or any kind of industrial company, or a bank is different from Siemens. You have different aims, etc., and the bodies of control, or the bodies which lead the governance, or we are on top of the governance, are different. Okay, so that's the basic approach. Leadership is always implemented into governance. Values are always implied as well. But the question is whether the values are good or bad, whether they are useful or not useful. Most of the models we know are utilitarian. Nicola already mentioned that. And for a utilitarian, it's very simple. Good or bad can be calculated. So if the amount of gains is bigger as a result from a certain decision, is better than another one. I don't think this is morally agreeable at all, because it's not always clear whether the higher amount of income is morally or ethically better. You have seen that on basis of the Pinto example Nicola exposed. So it's important to differentiate the quality of aims. But there are always aims involved. There are always values involved. But the question is whether they're good or bad. Okay, that was the first step. Now the second one. Why should design education take care of leadership and of governance? Why should it be part, from my personal point of view, why should all these questions be part of the design education? Well, The first answer is because designers are part of companies, or they are independent. They are stakeholders in a way, or maybe managers. But that's not the only reason why I recommend to make leadership part of the design education. I think the more important aspect is that designers should understand their own role within a bigger whole, within a bigger social and economic world. So in the end, the education should contribute to the self-identification of designers within the immediate and the wider context of their work. Sometimes I've got the impression that designers are trained technically, primarily technically, without this sort of making clear in what kind of social economic context they are working. So they might be perfect in the end in terms of industrial designers or whatever, but they don't know their role in the wider context. So they need to be educated as citizens, as political entities in their own understanding. So the self-identification, I think, is quite important. Why? Because all people who study design have expectations, and expectations are always implemented in the wider context. And if they don't have a sound education to self-identify their role, they don't know their claims, they don't know their entitlements and their demands. So I think the role has to be taught in the education. And therefore, I recommend a comprehensive contribution of other subjects outside design in the narrow sense, implementing into the education people from economics, from business studies, from sociology, from political science, because all these aspects play an important role to understand governance perspectives, leadership perspectives. Okay, that's the second step. Now, what are values? We're talking about values all the time, and there was a time in the 1920s when in Germany there was a very warm, if not hot, discussion about values. One of the great contributors to this discussion was Max Weber, whom you probably all know, one of the founder fathers of sociology. But he wasn't a sociologist himself, he was a philosopher, he did legal studies, he was a historian. And he wanted to, in 1904, he wanted to pronounce the leading aims of social sciences, including national economics, to a wider public, and he wrote a huge article, about 60 pages, how to avoid value questions in order to gain objective knowledge about social problems. So he was against values as a primary sort of focus of interest. This sounds quite strange because, on the other hand, he said, we are all, as sociologists, we are all facing values of society, democracy is a couple of values, transparency is one of the key values. So he was a bit of a kind of split personality. His propaganda was, yes, to face these overall values, but the analysis should be objective and not value-driven. Values should not be recommended, he said, by the research, because it's Weltanschauung, ideology. So for him it was absolutely clear that all values are somehow surrounded by ideologies. And I must say, he's not totally wrong. That's my third recommendation. We should be quite clear that when we talk about values without asking ourselves, are they part of any ideology at all, we're doing not a very critical job. So we should ask ourselves, are there any hidden or open ideologies connected with values? Of course, when we talk about democratic values, we assume that the ideology behind it is okay. It's democracy. But democracy is an ideology. If I was a monarchist, which would easily be the case as being Bavarian, of course, I might be very skeptical about democratic ideology. Okay. Now, as against Max Weber, I think in the end he was wrong, because he didn't believe that values could be facts. He thought values are like clouds, cloudy things. But I think values are facts if, and only if, they are part of the causes and motivations we act on. So if I believe in the value of any kind of asset governing my personal life, I will follow that aim, and that means it works like a fact in my motivational household. So I will go in for it. And every cause of an action is a fact. So I think if we do social analysis, we should believe, as a kind of premise to our research, that values can be facts, social facts, normative facts. There are normative facts, of course. We talked about it, or we heard about it for hours today. Normative facts are, for instance, responsibilities. They are normative facts. They are facts because they are binding. And if we ignore them, there are negative results. Okay, so normative facts, values can be normative facts. Now, my fourth step is to offer a kind of survey on different models of corporate governance and leadership. Actually, I'm sort of carrying coal to Newcastle because, in a way, Nicola already talked about it, and you could read about it in the volume by Timo Meinhardt. But I do it a bit differently. I don't offer you the different models under a pretext. So I'm not talking about public value as a kind of core perspective. I just want to tell that different models should be offered in the education or teaching of designers, because these models should be seen by every single student in its own right. So, for instance, the first one, the principal-agent theory. It's a very widely used kind of model in the economic world, which means that there are only two major figures playing the important roles in the governance of any kind of bodies. The principal, he's in charge of everything, he's the owner, and the agent could be a designer, a person which is implied or implemented into the process. So there is a kind of dualist relation between a self-interest principle, the principal wants to make money or gain something, and therefore he hires an agent who is self-interested in his own way, who performs under sort of contractual conditions his job. This model is used in institutional economics. It's an asymmetrical relation between principal and agent, and the asymmetry goes deep down into the relationship between these two groups. It's not just one person on each side. It goes deep down because there is an informational asymmetry. There are asymmetrical aims although both parts are self-interested, they are interested in wholly different things. It's not just the money they are interested in, or the reputation. They are interested in self-respect and in other values which are not immediately to be seen. So there is a kind of difference in terms of risk behavior on both sides. Different motivations, different incentives. And of course, in the end, one of the results is there are differences in reputation. And there are some interesting aspects behind this dualist relation. There are hidden actions. The principal will see to it that there is some control on the agent without his knowledge or without him not knowing it. There is hidden information on both sides. And of course, this is all kind of the trust which is in terms, which is theoretically a kind of precondition of this agent-principal relation. The trust is diminished by the hidden informations, by the hidden aims, by the hidden incentives. So, in a way, this model of principal-agent theory is not very efficient if it's seen as a kind of mechanism which improves the standing of a company or of an enterprise. It's of course hierarchical, but that's not the problem at all, because there are two hierarchies, sometimes fighting each other, controlling each other, etc. And of course, in the end, the principle is always on the safe side. So this is one of the models which has been analyzed for decades by people in the business studies. We had one of the colleagues here in business studies at the Ludwig-University. He wrote a couple of books about principal-agent theory, improving the model, etc. But nowadays there are alternative models. The stewardship models. The stewards are trustworthy people. That's the idea behind it. They are owners or partly owners. That's not the important aspect. The stewards are trustworthy because they are interested in doing the right thing for the company, for the organization, for the corporate unit they are working in. They are not primarily self-interested, although they know exactly what their interest is, but their interest is primarily they are interested in the company, not in their own reputation. So in a way, they respect higher values of cooperation. They are not convinced that defection always leads to the best result. So they want to use the resources and the assets in a company for the company and not for themselves. So this is stewardship theory. Sounds nice. The question is whether it works and whether you find people who are stewards. Some people are called steward, but whether they are stewards is a different question. Okay. Then the third one has been talked about, so I just mentioned it, stakeholder theory. They have the internal stakeholders, employees, managers, owners, and the external one, customers, shareholders, creditors, etc. I don't go into this kind of theory, but I would like to say a few words about the grand alternative to all these models. It's the Kantian approach. Now, you all know that Kant, who celebrates, not himself, but we celebrate his 300th birthday. He was born in 300 years ago, on the 22nd of April, 300 years ago, and all the philosophers around the world are now talking about Kant because he has this birthday. Now, Kant is known as a very rigid kind of ethical theorist, which is true, and that's why people in business studies don't believe that he could contribute to any sound entrepreneurial body. Because if either you are doing ethics or you gain money, but not the mix is a bit difficult. So the Kantian approach is not very popular among the primarily utilitarian-oriented business studies people. But I think, and I had a student who, student is not the right word, but he was already a CEO of a company here in Munich, and he wrote a PhD thesis. I was a supervisor for this PhD thesis, and he tried, although he knew exactly what he was doing as a CEO, he proposed a Kantian solution to leadership. Why? Because his idea was that social and individual responsibility should be united in all kinds of leadership in bodies, in corporate governance. And why Kantian? Because Kant proposed mutual trust as a kind of general basis of decision making. And of course, this is a non-utilitarian virtue. He proposed a couple of virtues in the old-fashioned sense. The old-fashioned sense of virtues are prudence, justice, courage, temperance. But Kant, at the beginning, in the 80s, in the early 80s, he was a bit skeptical about the ancient idea of virtue ethics. Only later on, in his Metaphysics of Metaphysik der Sittlichkeit, der Sitten, he proposed virtues. But the main idea, what my student, my former student, was convinced by Kant, was that Kant proposed the only really interesting model of self-determination. In a Kantian approach, you always determine what you are doing on basis of the question whether this decision, based on a maxim of your personal maxim, could be generalized without contradiction. So generalization without contradiction is the final test for finding out what you do. And if you come out, I'll give you an example, if you follow the maxim, I only help other people if they help me, which sounds okay, yeah? Why should I help other people if they don't help me? Typical utilitarian aspect of action. Kant would say, oh, this is contradictory. Why is it contradictory? Because you might be in need of help without having done any help to other people before. So, and you badly need the help of others, but you can't get it because you failed your own test. You failed the test of generalization. So I think you are always on the safe side if you come to conclusions where generalization without contradiction is a test for your decision making. But in the end, of course, even a Kantian CEO has to make gains, has to make money with this company. But money making, or the result of the decision making in terms of material assets, is not anti-Kantian, because it can be simply implied into the generalization model, because all your customers or all your partners in the business have the same aim. They want to make money. And you shouldn't hinder them to make money, and you should not allow them to hinder you from making money. So it can be implemented into a Kantian model. I've written a small book about ethics, in German of course, Ethik und ihre Grenzen, where I describe this kind of unified model where money making is not excluded in a Kantian approach. Okay, this might be enough on the Kantian approach. Now, a couple of final words. The ethics of leadership should not be seen as something which is primarily a matter of theory. Why? Because the quality of leadership shows. There's a big difference between showing and saying. If I say, I'm a good person, don't believe me. I'm not a criminal, but not yet. And don't drive me into it. But if you want to know whether I'm really a good person, just see what I'm doing. So it shows. And I think this is a major perspective on differentiating, seeing the difference between good and bad leadership. Good leadership shows. Of course, the New Testament is full of examples for that. The Good Samaritan, for instance, you know the story, I need not repeat it. That's a good story because the Good Samaritan shows that he's a good person because he helps the guy who is in need of help without sort of having any gain from it. So I think that there's a difference between showing and saying. I'm not the inventor of this difference. The philosopher who said the most interesting things about this difference was Ludwig Wittgenstein, whom you probably know. He has no major birthday this year. He was born in 1889, so his 100th birthday is long ago. Anyhow, he wrote about the difference between saying and showing. And I think it's going to be used for differentiating between the ethics or the ethical values of leadership in corporate governance. Now, leading to the job you're now doing in these sort of separate, how many? Four separate units. You should fill up these 4 different units and not sort of concentrate on one of them. It's a bit like entering the underground, where people all say, don't only use the first door, please use the other doors too. So you should, how many on one table?
6, 7.
6, 7, okay. So you should sort of gather around these tables. I have just one question for all of you, and it has nothing to do primarily with the ethics of leadership, but with the value we have been hearing about and discussing for hours now, sustainability. Sustainability. What is sustainability, or what does it mean? What exactly should be sustainable? A lot of things are sustainable. Putin's war is quite sustainable, but not very good. It's terrible. Now, what exactly should be sustainable? And my question, or the question which I want you to think about is, please find examples where the pros and cons of sustainability are important. I give you an example. We all know that the future energy should be green. And there are lots of options about making the energy green. For instance, windmills. Windmills are sustainable in terms of saving, not saving, but producing energy without using coal or carbon without any carbon footprint, of course, after they are implemented, before they are produced. So windmills are a good idea, sustainable idea, but there is a con, something which shows the background, or a kind of negative background. Many people are claiming, and people who are in a way arguing for the green world of the future, they say the landscapes are sustainably destroyed by windmills. They destroy the wonderful Bavarian landscape. And I'm not joking, it's probably true in the eyes of many. And these Bavarian Greens, they argue, why don't you put all those windmills on the north coast of Germany? That's a boring coast, and the windmills don't destroy anything, you know. The opposite, they are interesting up there, not here. So that's one example. The other is hydro stations. Hydro stations are, again, like windmills, a source for energy. And some rivers, for instance, a river called Inn, a beautiful river, starting off right in the center of Switzerland. There are more than 60 hydro stations along this river, more than 60, something like 65 or so. And ecologists argue this is dreadful for the reproduction of fish, because the fish are mongered in these turbines. And of course, people who own these windmills, these hydro stations, argue against it and say, no, we have technical gadgets which save the fish, etc. But anyhow, so there are again pros and cons for hydro stations. And my question is, please find other examples where the sustainable aspects are but there are pros and cons for sustainable aspects. Would you agree with it? Yes? Or no? Yes? Oh, thank you very much. So, so, jetzt sind wir wieder zusammen. Ihr habt nicht protestiert gegen die Aufgabe und ich bin wirklich sehr interessiert zu hören, welche Ergebnisse ihr herausgefunden habt. Fangen wir einfach mal hier links an, also um es politisch korrekt zu machen. Irgendwie, wer ist denn bei euch Sprecher?
Ich denke die Dame hier wäre besser. I'm not able to give a recap of our group.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
So you need a micro.
But I think what we discussed is the different types of sustainability and what makes something sustainable, starting from solar panels to electric vehicles to Bitcoin to remote work. And so all of that has obviously very different sustainable aspect and looks at sustainability in different ways. And and if you put a price tag on it, and I think the example of the Bitcoin was really interesting to me, is that one member was excited about the Bitcoin, bought Bitcoin, and thought it's really cool, it's really interesting, and then a few years later sold all the Bitcoins because after learning how much energy it is consuming, right? And so something which in this way was very intangible became very tangible, and then in other examples, something what is very tangible becomes very intangible. And maybe someone else wants to add. No.
But what's the price you would like to pay? What would you like to give up, or?
I think maybe everyone has to talk about this in you know, I think it's very different. So for example, maybe, you know, in the example of maybe the Bitcoin, and I'm going to, you know, speak for you for the moment, but you maybe give up the gain of on the investment you were hoping to get, based on, you know, the consciousness for the environment. And then you could also think of other examples maybe where it's the other way around. And I can't give you the exact amount because I don't know the amount, but I guess that can be very easily, you know, calculated.
Okay, thank you very much. Next group.
Hey, oh, it's loud. We took the example smartphones, and then we questioned if smartphones should be sustainable, and we questioned what it means to be sustainable. If it means it stays longer, it stays with us. We want smartphones to be sustainable because we want to use them and we need them. And then we looked into what are the pros and cons of smartphones. And addiction is a con, we all feel. Then we talked about it changed migration a lot, because through smartphones you can go anywhere and keep in touch with anybody. What was the next one? The material is con, because the production is not sustainable. It is pro, how it enables us to have equal access to information, but it's also con because everybody can put fake information and hate on the internet. The connection is a pro because we are connected, but it's also con a little bit because we lose the one-on-one connection a little bit. Intimacy, we are very intimate with the smartphone, and maybe it's replacing a little bit the human intimacy. Privacy, it's coming everywhere with us, it's a con, even to the toilet. It gives joy because it makes life easier, Google Maps, everything, you can Google anything. Take pictures, be creative, be efficient. It is efficient, and con is we are losing the human touch a little bit. And then we asked ourselves, what is the price we want to pay for using this invention? Time. We are willing to give our time and our attention a little bit and become a little bit addicted, but not too much, maybe. But we didn't finish the discussion. Maybe the other ones have also ideas.
Thanks very much. Are there any questions towards this group or to the first one? Disbelief, protest, aggressive behavior, whatever. Okay. Very, very happy group. Thanks very much. Now,
Thank you. Okay, we were thinking about sustainable material choices in design or in the business of design. So what are designers doing? How do they choose their materials? And one example was that if we, for example, choose a material, I think we said for a car, right? For a car company, if it's sustainable in the interior design maybe, this might create good feelings for the customer, for the company itself. It creates a nice story to communicate about the company and its approach. But it might be, on the other hand, a superficial way of looking at things. Might be not so sustainable in the long run in communicating. Yeah. Another example we came up with was the way of or the channels of communication. So we were comparing digitally, communicating digitally to communicating maybe via printed material. So, and we were not sure what the math is or the footprint of these both possibilities, But we came up with the example of the IF Foundation, who chose to print a book on improving design education. And of course, this needs some trees, and you have to print it with color and maybe other chemicals. But it might be worth the price, because a book might create more impact in the long run and educate millions of students worldwide how to be more sustainable in their work. So this was kind of the calculation that we were thinking about. And we were also thinking about that printing a book is making choices and narrowing it down. And this could also be a bad side maybe, or a bad point, because we are limiting the range for teaching design. Yeah? If we only publish a certain amount of information in the book. All right, I think that's it. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Yeah. Any questions towards the speaker or the group? Everybody is sort of probably hungry by now. I think you are the last one.
Yeah, I'm the last one. This is too loud, that's okay. So I think we were really focused on quantity. So we had a lot of examples basically about like things that we see that have pro and cons. And of course there's like the usual suspects like nuclear energy, solar energy, where you see you have like some sort of really like something that seems very pro, like cheap energy, or like almost free energy, but comes with a clear con side with maybe long-term uncertainty, long-term trash, and difficulties within maybe city planning, or maybe fast fashion, where this is really about self-expression, and then the trade-offs wouldn't be as great maybe, or the cons. And then we also had some more unusual examples, maybe like one-way medical care products, where you like basically cannot really avoid the whole topic because like there's really lives on the line. Or maybe like a the water-based toilet system that like really gives us hygiene, especially in times like these, and also comfort, but then also wastes a lot of clean water, and also kind of fertile human waste. And in general, I think we had this big difficulty, and we were struggling with the price we were willing to pay for it. And we were kind of framing it that all of these things could also be seen as design challenges. So if you have the right resources, the money, and maybe the right people, you might find solutions to all of these examples. And I think that was our take on this.
Thanks very much. Now, from my point of view, two things are remarkable. First, all these groups didn't discuss the very same example. Amazing, isn't it? Why? You all had different examples. Why is this important? Because if you imagine a whole society discussing sustainability, the probability that there is a majority arguing for one example is very low. Second, the costs. There will be no agreement on the costs. I mean, if you say, I don't eat fish, so if there are dead fish in the inn, in the river Inn, I don't care about it. I care about energy. Many people will say, you must be crazy, because fish is important. Okay, we only have 7% living creatures in the wild, only 7%. The rest is produced by human beings, including ourselves. So, of course, there are wild birds and rabbits, etc., but the majority are pigs, beef, human beings, etc. 7% is very low in biological terms. So, of course, already we have given up quite a lot. Now, again, in a democratic society, there will be low agreement on any costs. So the job of the parties is to discuss costs. But this is not done. And this, I think, is one of the major problems we are facing today. The parties are unable to offer the costs, because if they offer costs, they think nobody will go in and vote for them. This is a disaster. Thank you very much.